so today's topic, we're going to be talking about romantic relationships.
Yeah.
A few areas that we're going to be talking about are what we care about in healthy relationships, obstacles we faced in the past, and how to navigate marriage and long-term relationships with our partners.
Yeah. And then I think we'll drop in a few spicier topics in the middle and at the end too, if we have time.
Yeah. First question I want to ask you is, what are some of the most important factors that you care about in a healthy, fulfilling relationship?
I think my answer has probably changed now that I'm married as compared to 4 or 5 years ago. I've just learned more about the topic. First thing is probably shared values. Second thing is compatibility. Compatibility in the sense of it's comfortable when you're around each other, when you're living together. I think that's really important and something that you discover maybe a year or two into your relationship. Another thing is, I think you don't have to have all of the same interests, but you have to have a few shared interests that you can do together as activities. And then the last thing is being on the same page about where your future is going. I think those for me are the most important things in a relationship. I think if you have those things, it's probably much easier to navigate around the rest of the smaller things in between you two. Yeah.
How did you determine compatibility in that 1 to 2 year mark?
I think it's helpful to either live together for a brief period of time. I think it becomes self-evident when you start living together. The other way is if you just go on a longer trip together for a week or 2 weeks. It also starts to become evident whether your lifestyle habits are compatible with each other or not. I think some people probably have more willingness to adapt. People will have more willingness to adapt, and you just have to determine what your willingness and threshold is and whether that matches what the other person is bringing. Yeah.
How about in terms of, and I can talk about this too, in terms of values? You mentioned that's one of the most important things.
I actually feel that's something that doesn't manifest in the beginning of a relationship. I don't know if you agree. And in the beginning of a relationship, I feel that's a point where you're just having fun together, la-di-da, and unless you're very sure that you're gonna be you're very sure that you want to be serious about the relationship, that's not something that I test for or probe for. But they definitely have to be there, and I feel if you don't have shared values, it's just not possible to be in a long-term relationship together.
Yeah.
That's why I find it surprising when couples of different religions are able to come together. I actually don't know how that works, but I guess their shared value is tolerance and adaptability for each other. Yeah.
Or one of them is willing to practice the religion of another.
Yeah.
In some way. Yeah. I think when it came to early stages of dating for me, because I knew that I wanted a long-term committed relationship on onset, the way that I approached dating was very values driven.
Okay.
So, and one way that I found that helped, one way I found I was able to identify the values was by just having a set of deeper questions at date 2 that I could
at date 2?
Yeah, probably on date 2 or date 3.
Can you give some examples?
Yeah. So so the date 1 was more kind of vibe check, and actually I felt it kind of was interesting because it's more we talked about like topics like where we're from, but also those types of topics brought out values-based questions like why I moved to New York, like what instigated that, and like how I approached like building friendships in New York, and like those types of things brought out values-based answers. And then when it came to date 2, I actually had like a set that were a little like a level deeper, like things like what are like some challenges that you've experienced in the past that like approach how you think today, or approach like why you've made certain decisions in your life. And I feel like those types of questions and the answers that they give kind of target like, are they like ambitious, or are they driven, or do they what they care about generally.
Okay.
And that helped me a lot in the early stages of dating.
Okay, so why did your current partner pass with flying colors on date 2? Please elaborate.
So I think, dang, I also should have prepared a little bit better for this. So I prepared.
Yeah.
But I have to like dive deep.
I think it's better to be a little more organic.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think back to those early stages. So I think the what I liked about our very first date was like the level of things that we could relate on, given that we both were from the West Coast and we both transplanted to New York. We don't know if we have long-term plans to move back to California yet, but we know our families are still there.
Okay.
And so what I learned from that shared history is that he also values like adventure and trying new things.
Yeah.
And that's why he moved to New York.
Yeah.
And I also learned that because his family is in California, he's considering going back. So he's also very family oriented.
Well, it also sounds like he sort of passed the test on do you sort of have the same future plans?
Yeah. That's one thing too.
Yeah.
And one thing I really cared about is finding a partner who's like very driven and disciplined. And I felt that like
interesting.
Yeah. through his like through what he shared about what he does in New York, like he is very active, like trying to learn volleyball and growing his skills, and also he's very into sports in general. So the level of effort and time that he puts to improve those skills and get better, like showed his discipline.
Yeah.
And so those were just some areas that I really liked. And then I also thought that he was very good at articulating and explaining his like thought process and why he did certain things, and I really liked that. Yeah. So it made the conversation in our first initial dates like really easy. It's just the back and forth. It didn't feel difficult. Yeah. How about you and your partner?
I think a couple of things that I realized off the bat that made me feel good about his personality and qualities that could make him a good partner was I could tell that he was like a very dedicated and committed person to things that he decided were worth his time. So kind of similar in that like he will put in the energy and the effort. I could also tell that he was genuinely like good at conflict resolution, and I feel like that's pretty valuable to have in a relationship, is to be able to navigate that like smoothly and be able to come out of it on the other side. I think those are the initial takeaways that I had about him, and then the rest I feel like I discovered later on.
How has he shown that he's good at like conflict resolution and more like serious topics or more serious situations?
I just feel that when serious conversations and serious conflicts arise, they don't really arise that often. I feel that I trust him to have a reasonable point of view. And that I trust him that we will be able to talk about things and come to a solution together.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Like when I feel like I'm on the verge of annoyance, like with my partner, I'm like constantly reminded that like, oh, I mean, his viewpoint makes sense. Why am I getting annoyed at like something so stupid? Like, and so yeah, like it's nice to be with someone where you know that they're rational and like
100%.
You trust their decision making, you trust their viewpoints, that things won't stray too far, even if like maybe you and I are like kind of crazy in a moment, or like willful in a moment, or irrational in a moment, like.
But generally, two reasonable people come to a reasonable conclusion.
Yeah.
Tell me about why or what you learned from your previous relationships and how that applied to like your now relationship. Like, what were your learnings from being in a long-term relationship?
Yeah.
Before.
So, the context of my prior relationship was I got with him in college. Like, so I was still very young, early 20s, And I don't think that I had fully developed as a person at that time.
That makes sense.
But what I really liked about that relationship was, like, I think it was clear the immediate values that I cared about in a person. Like, I wanted a genuinely kind person who cared about his friends and family. And I felt like that prior relationship really drove home, like, that aspect of a genuinely kind and authentic person.
So that's what attracted you to him initially?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what are the learnings during your long-term relationship that superseded that initial, like, ultimately you decided to part ways? Like, what superseded that initial compatibility?
So as I was going through that relationship and, like, getting older, I knew that, like, being able to plan for the future was really important to me as well. 100%. And I think something that was a challenge in that relationship was I didn't feel that we could operate as a team together because we weren't on the same page about planning for the future. And that included, like, what our long-term careers would look like, or what, like, potential family could look like. And that made me realize that I really wanted a partner who I could operate in as a team, where we could make joint decisions and have the shared values of, like, a long-term future. And
when did that first materialize? And, like, did you try to work through it? Like, how long did you try to work through it for before you decided that?
So the thing about being able to think in the future, I actually saw that very early. Like, I realized that was slightly missing very early on. But I didn't know how important that was, given that I was so young. And I was figuring out my future too. So I wouldn't say it really was, like, an issue for me until maybe the late 20s.
Okay.
And then when I was thinking about, like, the 5-year plan, and I didn't feel like we were there yet or operating as a team yet.
Okay.
So then that's when I moved to New York. At the time, I moved to New York because we were in different stages of life, but the plan was that I would come back to California and we would be together and move in.
Okay.
And while I was in New York, I think my personal growth, like, expedited as well. And so that's where I started to see a greater rift in, like, the trajectories of, like, our lives. Like, we were starting, I felt like it was more clear the values that I wanted in a partner. And I wasn't seeing that in manifesting in us. And so that's when it was very clear that, okay, I'm not sure this is the right partnership. And that's when we made the decision to cut it off in 2023.
I mean, I think it's interesting, though, because even after you moved here, you were in a relationship for a while. So it's not like it surfaced immediately. Or even though you knew, like, it still took a while to come to that.
Yeah, and I think that's where the learnings come from too. Where I realized that if incompatibilities are seen earlier on in a relationship, it's not worth it to continue holding on and hoping that things will change, when most likely they won't change drastically. So that was one learning. And I think after moving to New York, I also had a greater sense of who I was and what I wanted in life, and that also made it clearer for me too.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. I feel like the only other relationship I was in, I mean, we were basically incompatible, and we realized that around month 6, so we didn't waste our time after that, which I guess is, like, good in a way that it was efficient.
Yeah, very efficient.
Yeah.
I think if I could turn back time, I would have been stronger at knowing what was important for me, or, like, I would have thought more thoroughly about what was important. And I think it's also just coming from a first relationship too, like, not knowing how to navigate that when things aren't lining up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very fair, because you kind of just don't really know that in college.
Yeah. How important do you think, like, family dynamics are, or, like, family compatibility is in a relationship?
I think the answer is that it depends on your relationship with your family. It depends on your values functionally. Okay. And it depends on the values between the two of you, because that is actually something that is more of a challenge in my current relationship, is because my husband has a very, very deep relationship with his family and extended family, whereas I feel like I obviously value my family, but I have like a relationship with my nuclear family and not with my extended family. And so the expectations for like communication, for visiting, for like the level of commitment, frankly, of seeing people is just different. I would say that it just depends on if I think you need to be on the same page. Like if you and your partner both have really great relationships with your families, then there's no conflict, because then you have the same expectations around how the partner will treat the family. Also, if you have maybe weaker relationships with your family, you also have the same expectation around the dynamics of maintaining the family relationship. Yeah. That's my opinion. I don't know how you see it.
I agree. I feel like I do think it's important that family dynamics are at least cordial. Sure. And so, like, while in-laws don't need to be like best friends with each other, I think it's good that like if there's family gatherings that they can be in the same room and like talk to each other if they could. Yeah.
What was interesting is my opinion on marriage changed during the duration of our relationship. So I think we can talk about this as a topic, basically, because frankly, like when I first started talking with my now husband, I didn't really believe in marriage, or I didn't feel like it was a needed component of like two people being in love. You don't have to be married. Yeah. I think my opinion on
I actually had that same opinion. Yeah. We never talked about that before. Yeah. But you go on.
I think like my opinion now is that's still true, but marriage as an institution has other value. Namely, like it solidifies more of like a partnership between the two of you in the business sense. And it's also a vehicle for passing wealth down to your legitimate children. Yeah. So it creates security, which contributes to like a deeper sense of partnership.
Yeah. Wow. Is that like, how is that something that you developed or learned? Like, is that something that you've learned since marriage?
I think I've always held the opinion that marriage probably has its like separate values, and there are reasons that people do it, but I didn't feel like it was something that I needed for my relationships. Yeah. But I knew that it was important to my husband, and now that I am married, I see the value. Yeah. I see the value and the benefits of it, and I appreciate it. Yeah. So I appreciate him for being so solid in his view that it's something that is important and wanted. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. It's interesting because I also had that same opinion in my 20s. Yeah. I was like, well, if we're in a solid, committed relationship, like, why do we need to get married? Like, unless, and I thought maybe the main reason. Yeah. I thought maybe the main reason is, like, maybe if you want kids, like, the societal expectation that you should be married to have kids. But that aspect about the business piece and, like, the deeper partnership is actually very valid and very interesting. I think one aspect too is maybe I also held that belief because in my prior relationship I couldn't see that we were working as a team, and so maybe it also stemmed from this sense of like fear and insecurity that if we got married, then I was like foreseeing like conflict because I couldn't see us as a team yet. And so I was like, oh, we don't need to get married, like we could just be together. Like I think now as I've thought back about it, but now in my new relationship, like this feeling has changed toward marriage because I feel that we could potentially be a solid team. Yeah. And so now I'm like, okay, I feel more excited about the prospect of marriage. Yeah. And being able to like have a family together and have a partnership, like, as you mentioned. Yeah. What are other like business aspects that you're referencing?
I think it depends on the couple, but if you share finances, that's like one area that you feel like you are more in partnership on, because you have to make decisions together on it, about it, towards your future. So I think it sparks bigger conversations and deeper conversations that, as in probably as like dating, not so serious. I think it's deciding, and then once you do that, it's kind of deciding how you want to build together, essentially. So it's just like unlocking an aspect of relationship that probably didn't fully exist before marriage.
And I'm thinking like the extent of financial discussions you would have when dating is like living together, paying rent. Like, how would you split rent? Things like that.
It's more straightforward. It's like, we're going on a trip. How should we split the trip? Or like, we're eating dinner. Maybe I'll cover this dinner. Maybe you'll cover that dinner. It's not about, where do we put our wealth so that we have a better future together.
When you're in the dating phase, like splitting of different things. Like, how did you allocate, like, how you split money? I would be curious to your view on this. So I think during dating, my opinion is that it's actually pretty fair to, like, split most things. But if one person out-earns the other, then it should be more proportional to, like... the split should be more proportional to the salaries. But I think it takes a little bit of the enjoyment, and it feels a little bit too commercial if you split things down to the cent between two people. But I think it's totally okay to like split things when you're dating. I think that's very fair. One thing that my husband is like a very generous person, and I think he didn't really like splitting, and he liked covering things. And that is something that I think made me realize one of his values was being very generous. So that was a pro, but I still tried to like pay for things, or my part of things, when we were dating, because that's like part of my values, is I think like pulling my weight. Love that. I think I agree with that. My partner's also super generous. And I do like that aspect because it shows how they are as a person to not just me but other people. He's also generous with his family and friends too. And I think to some extent, like, there's one aspect where I do have some traditional views. Like, I do think like what I value is that I have like a strong partner that can provide in addition to me, so it's not just me providing. And I think one way that shows is like their ability to contribute more, especially as you said, when their income is higher. So I agree, it should also be proportional for like rent, if say we were living together, for example. Large expenses, I think, but I think like with traveling together or smaller, more recreational things, like it's up to the person. Like,
it's not a
he might like pay for a lot of things, but I also try to pay for dates or other areas, smaller things. A controversial question. If they were working in a blue-collar job and you're working in a white-collar job, do you think it's possible to be compatible?
I think it's possible, but it would just mean other aspects of your life have to really closely align if this aspect diverges. Because I feel like you have only like 3 to 4 basic tenets that you're spending your hours, your life, your energy doing, and work is one of those tenets. Sometimes it's not even about salary. Like, sometimes it's about like lifestyle too. Like a good example is dating a doctor. I think that's personally undesirable because of the lifestyle challenges that are put on them, at least from their like 20s to 30s while they're in med school. I don't know if it's like a desirable thing to date a doctor unless you're in it for the long term. So like it's even like lifestyle. But even like during the week, if they need to go to bed at 6 p.m. and wake up at 3 a.m., like when are you going to go on your date? Right? Like,
how integrated do you think your friend group should be in your relationship?
I don't think they need to be that integrated. As long as each partner is willing to integrate somewhat into the other friend group. I don't think you need to bring the friend groups together.
Yeah.
That's
and do you think your significant other should be close with your friends and vice versa?
They don't need to be, but they need to be cordial and like friendly. And I think it's important to me that they all have good opinions of each other, but they don't need to be particularly close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say related to the opinions piece, I think especially if you're bringing a new person, like a significant other, into a group of friends which you've had for a long time or had history with, I also trust the opinions of what that group of friends 100%, think.
Yeah.
Because I know some people they ignore the opinions of their friends when it comes to newly created relationships.
Okay.
Yeah, and
that's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I think it's important, especially if your friends align with your values. Like, you'd also want to make sure they think that your significant other aligns with your values as well.
I mean, you're friends with your friends for a reason. It's probably because you have some sort of like aligned values, or at least you're like close core group of friends.
Yeah.
So I think you should probably trust their opinion. And frankly, like their interest is for your best interest.
Yeah.
So I don't see why you would not disregard that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good one. Okay.